Welcome. All right, so what I'd like to do is just kind of summarize. Welcome, you're at the end of the course, and just kind of summarize some tips and tricks that you hopefully can take out of this course, as well as some common mistakes that a lot of students have. So remember our perfect square trinomial. We're going to be solving set equal to 0, so we have ax squared plus bx plus c. So kind of a couple of the tips and tricks always to kind of remember is one, being able to identify your perfect squares. Now, what happens a lot of times, and I think in this problem, is identifying your perfect squares, not only just as far as like 9 equaling 3 times 3, but like 1 over 9 equaling 1/3 times 1/3. So don't be scared of the fractions, right? We can still use fractions and, and rewrite them as a product of itself. And a couple of nice little tips and tricks also to be able to identify with this is remember to always take the square root of your middle term, b equals 2 times the square root of a times the square root of c. And most importantly, that 3, that middle term, the sign of your b, okay, so it's either going to be plus or minus b, and that's always going to be determined, or that's going to be your determining of your factors of c. So remember, b, if it's positive, that means your two factors for c are going to be positive. And if b is negative, then your two factors for in your two-factor form for c are going to be negative. So it's very, very important to kind of understand that, to look at that once you've been able to identify that. One of the, probably I'd say, the mistakes that students get is a lot of times they don't see the perfect square. Sometimes, we might have something that's like 18x squared plus 48x plus 32, and they say, oh, well, there's no squared numbers. Remember, you could always look into factoring things out. If I factor out a 2, now I have 9x squared plus 24x plus 16, right? That's a very common thing that you guys can do. And now you can see that this is a perfect square trinomial. Another thing, as far as common mistakes, is students, if they don't see the quadratic or they get stuck, they don't go back to their regular factoring technique. Remember, all perfect square trinomials, these can still be factored by using our traditional factoring technique. So if you get stuck trying to rewrite this as a binomial squared and bypassing a lot of steps, go back and work to your original factoring techniques and work through the problem. So a couple things, again, just to summarize tips and tricks, try to identify the perfect square as easily as possible. And then remember that your binomial squared is just going to be the square root of your ax plus or minus the square root of your c term. And that's all going to be dependent on if your b is positive or negative. And then that's going to be your binomial squared, and you can solve it either by using the square root method or the zero product property. And if you get stuck, you can't go from here to here, make sure you always go back and use your traditional factoring techniques. Thanks.